The mistress who gave herself to the scheming Earl John, a lecherous woman having fun with her younger brother. All these sordid stories are about one girl named Catherine Orleans, and they're all just false rumors. It's been 10 years since her stepmother Lola became the wife of the Viscount of Orleans. Open discrimination and a cold attitude. Stepmother, together with Anne, her daughter by the Viscount, tormented Catherine relentlessly, giving her no peace. She treated Catherine very badly. "How dare you raise your head, Belly? Go to your room and don't even think about showing your face," she said in every situation. At first, Viscount Orleans tried to come between them, but then he too began to regard Catherine as a mere nuisance. But Catherine herself wanted little. She didn't need as many things as Anne did, nor did she need lavish jewelry. She didn't care that the stories in the bedroom were tattered, and the heels were so worn that the shoes were different heights. But she had her limits too. For her dead mother's sake, she gritted her teeth and put up with it for 2 years. But now she didn't see the need for it anymore, because Catherine was done. It was deadly annoying, and she wasn't going to take it anymore. One day, Catherine's stepmother, namely Lola Orleans, called her in and started yelling and saying that their family didn't need such a daughter. At that moment, the girl thought that there was nothing surprising about it, and it happened all the time. Catherine pushed back her chair and sat down on it. Lola began to tell her that the eldest daughter had no manners at all, because the guests were standing and she was the first to sit down. The stepmother then asked if that was what she had taught her. At this point, Catherine thought she hadn't learned anything, because she'd rather call a passing bug her homeroom teacher than her stepmother. Besides, she did not realize what kind of guests they were. In front of her stands only a miserable person, namely Catherine's fiancé, a man named Miss Charlotte Kilhold. After a little silence, Catherine asked, "What does she want from her and why is she pestering her?" The stepmother, pretending that she had already said she didn't need such a daughter in their family, asked if she had any hearing problems. But Catherine let this insulting remark pass her ears and asked her, "So you mean to tell me to get out of here?" But then suddenly another girl came running into the room. She shouted to her sister and told her never to say that. This girl was Lola's daughter by Viscount Orleans, and Charlotte's mistress. Her name was Anne Orleans. The girl said that all these rumors couldn't be true, and she believed Charlotte. The man asked Anne not to cry because her tears were not worth all this. The girl said that when she thinks about how her sister is suffering, tears come to her eyes. While Catherine watched all this, she thought it was clear as day that it was Anne who had started all these rumors. Not to mention that right now, these two are openly hugging right in front of her. When the stepmother saw this picture, she said that her daughter had such a tender heart, it touched her, and then suddenly she heard Catherine's voice. The girl said that so-and-so would leave. The stepmother began to ask why she had suddenly decided to go. But the girl interrupted her at once and said, "Was it suddenly you yourself who just said that I must go away?" Lola replied to her that did she really think it would only be enough for her to simply disown the family to dispel the foul rumors. At this point, the stepmother made such an evil face with a smirk that the girl thought she could at least try not to make such an expression. Thinking about it, Catherine asked her, then suggesting that she kill herself right now, and here. Without waiting for an answer, she turned to Charles and asked if he agreed. If she did so, a part of the House of Orleans, its dignity, would be restored if she hanged herself right now. As he continued to hug Anne, he started to say that he didn't think things were quite right. But the girl immediately interrupted him. The girl went up to her sister and asked her not to say so, that she would leave them, because it was all her fault, and let her rather blame it all on Anne. At that moment, Catherine thought how sick she was of it all. Her noisy stepmother, her stupid fiancé, and her hypocritical younger sister. After all this time, Catherine has become completely disillusioned with all these people. That's why it won't be hard for her to leave this house. The girl pulled her sister's hand out and said that she understood that silence was a sign of agreement, so she decided that she was going to go pack her things. As the girl left, Anne shouted after her from behind. At that moment, Catherine thought that she was acting as a loving sister to the last, and it was worthy of respect. As Catherine packed her things, she noticed that she had only filled one suitcase. She had already started to leave. Suddenly her stepmother runs up to her and starts asking her what she's doing. How dare she steal the family's valuables, and even called her a lousy girl. Catherine said that if they're chasing her away anyway, so why can't they at least let her leave in comfort? Lola got even more pissed off and asked, "What is it with her today, because that's all she does? That's how it is all day long, bickering." The girl replied to her that she heard her and let her shut up already. At that moment, Catherine thought she was defying her stepmother for the first time in her life. But if she had known it was so easy to express her emotions, she would have done it much sooner. When the girl went outside, her fiancé and sister were already standing there. Anne screamed, saying that she couldn't really leave them. She then turned to Charles and told him to answer her something. But Catherine went up to the man and slapped him on the cheek. When Anne asked the girl what she was doing, Catherine hit her. That's why there are already 2 on the ground, and Catherine said as she walked away that they could consider themselves to have gotten off lightly. After that she stopped and said that she had forgotten to tell them something. She asked him to tell the boy that if he wanted a quiet life, he should not look for it. Then she would not do anything to him. At the end she said, "Let's just part ways peacefully for eternity, and that's it." When she stepped outside the gate, she thought it was perfect. The sunlight was like a divine blessing to her. He's so bright and flawless. At that moment she wondered if she had felt more free in the past few days. Everything was perfect. As she got into the wagon, she thought that the first thing she needed to do was to leave her home. But now it was time for her to decide where exactly she was going to go. When the carriage pulled up to her, the coachman asked where to take her. Catherine answered him that it was beyond the Viscount Orleans lands to begin with. After that, she pulled out her map and looked at the fact that, judging by it, her father didn't really have that much land. And yet all this time she had been living on that piece of land and couldn't even breathe easy. The girl sighed and thought, "I'm sorry, Mother, but I've been patient for several years as it is. Now it's time to find my own way." As her musings were interrupted by a man and asked her if she had decided where they were going. The girl said she had just figured it out. The most prosperous region in the east of the empire. "Take me to Christopher County," Catherine said. That's where she would begin her new life. After a while the cart stopped and the man said that they were already there. After that they got out of the cart. They stopped next to a large and beautiful house. When Catherine looked at it, she was enchanted, and the coachman said the house was for sale. So it's exactly what she was looking for. Catherine chose Earl Christopher's domain as her new home for one simple reason. Not only were these lands renowned for their high level of economic, cultural, and artistic development, but they were also under the patronage of the famous wizard, Grand Duke Cesare. All in all, the city was extremely lively. But the mere fact that Catherine had to leave the Viscount of Orleans land cost her a lot of money and time. The change of destination on the road also cost her a lot of money. Because Catherine decided to leave Liana's Roeder and take her mother's maiden name, Fanny, she was unable to use the bank account recorded in her old name. The only thing that saved her was the fact that the coachman was in her position, so that the danger was averted. It had been nearly 15 days since Catherine, who had been searching for lodgings, had stayed at the inn. And now, after all these days, the good news finally came to her. She was still lucky enough to find a suitable house for sale on the outskirts of town. This old mansion she's visiting now is exactly that. When the girl scrutinized the house from the outside, she said that for that price it was just huge. The coachman said she was quite right. This is the largest residential building in the northern part of the city. There are 2 other buildings almost as large as the main building. She couldn't find another lot like that anywhere else in Christopher at that price. After looking at the agreement, the girl turned around and moved closer to the rock, saying that the view was also amazing. And the view was indeed marvelous. From that mountain, the whole town was visible. "Well said," added the coachman. "And from there to the harbor is very near. So it's a great place to admire the sea." But Catherine interrupted him. She was troubled by the question, why was the house so cheap if it was so lovely? The coachman stammered and said that she was just lucky. Nowhere else on the continent could she find a second house like this, so she was very lucky. At that moment, Catherine thought that it was still very strange. It couldn't be a mansion like this for such a small price. After a while the coachman asked, so she thought. Sure, the house had been empty and a bit neglected for a long time, but nothing was falling off anywhere. Catherine then asked what the problem was. Why is the house so cheap if it has all the perks? The coachman said there was no problem, she was just lucky, that's all. The girl interrupted him and said then she was leaving. Alia said that the house looked lovely, had a big garden and a great location. In general, she liked it, but apparently the mansion has serious flaws that could overwhelm its virtues. That's why she said she wouldn't enter into a contract. She also said that she no longer trusted him, so she would no longer need his services. The coachman tried to calm her down and bring her back, but the girl didn't listen to him and started to walk away. She thought that she knew it. She was asking too much in her position, so she would have to look for a house nearby and much more modest. Well, then suddenly the coachman ran up to her and told her to stop and not to go away because he was guilty before her. The man stopped, resting, and said he would explain everything to her. Catherine stopped and waited patiently for him. A few minutes, the coachman said that they actually say that a ghost appears in this mansion and it lives in the basement. On full moons, screams are heard from there, and some say they even hear women's laughter. Juan said he can't state how accurate this information is, but in the last 2 years as many as 4 tenants have moved out of there. But the girl interrupted him and said that she was ready to sign the contract. She took a piece of paper and began to sign it, saying that such a house would suit her just fine. She would be lonely without friends anyway. You're not going to get bored. She's not going to get bored in this house because there's a lot to do. So she said it was just perfect for her. After that, she handed over the deed. It was nearing evening when she got there and started cleaning. The house was very dirty. The girl, of course, was glad that she had found it, but there was a lot of dust and dirt. That's a lot of rooms. But for some distraction and respite, she went to the window. When she opened it, the fresh evening air blew into the house. She was looking at the most beautiful view of the evening city. After admiring it for a bit, she told herself that everything was fine. And don't let her worry so much, because compared to before, she was just in paradise now. Then she turned back and saw that it was very dark in the house, and she thought it might be better to light candles all over the house, because the electricity might not be fixed soon. She thought it would be a good idea, and wondered where they kept all sorts of not-so-needed things like candles in their house. When she looked down the stairs, she remembered Kutcher's words that a ghost appears and it lives in the basement. The girl told herself that she hoped everything would be all right and started down the stairs. When she was at the very bottom, she saw a light at the entrance to the basement and was very surprised by it, because even in normal rooms there is no light. When the girl opened the door and stepped inside, she saw strange drawings on the floor that glowed with a bright red light. She was amazed to see this unusual sight. Then suddenly from behind her she heard, "Whose voice is that? The one who possesses me will rule the world." The girl paid no attention to these words. She ran to get a mop and thought that someone had drawn paint all over the floor. She started trying to scrub the paint off and wondered who would have thought to paint all this. If they were going to use the basement, at least let them keep it clean. That was okay. She would try to get it all off. Suddenly a man approached her from behind and asked who she was. When the girl didn't answer, he came even closer, presented a gun to her throat and said, "I asked who you are." The man continued, "What are you? A chain dog of the Holy See? Have you managed to get here already?" The girl had only one thing on her mind. She didn't realize who this man was. The stranger said it was praiseworthy. But Catherine began to scrutinize his appearance. He had almond-shaped violet eyes, white skin like marble, a face of extraterrestrial beauty. The girl speculated that it might be the previous master of the house. The stranger continued to talk. He said his outfit was very believable. He said she was like the most normal city girl and he almost bought it. The girl started to slowly back away from him. The man said they were getting farther and farther away every day. At that moment, Catherine thought she'd had enough, so she punched him in the chest and shouted, "Paul!" The man didn't understand what she meant. Then Catherine backed off and said that she didn't understand a word he was saying, so she'd better let him start by scrubbing the floor. She said that she had been cleaning the place in her sweat and he had come and trampled on it. She also told him not to swing his sword. Not only did he break into someone else's house, but he wants her to report him for attempted murder. And he wants her to report him for attempted murder. The guy didn't know what to say. He certainly wasn't expecting that kind of reaction. After a bit of silence, he moved closer to her and told her it wasn't even funny, and asked if she thought it was time to stop pretending like she didn't know anything. After that, he moved away from her and said that he was in a great mood today. So if she would tell him everything, he would spare her. At that moment, Catherine remembered her mother telling her back when she was very young, "Never go in with strange wizards." Got it, my favorite Catherine. If you want to live together with your mother happily ever after forever, remember my words. Catherine thought at that moment that she would always remember her mother's admonition. And this man is definitely a wizard, so she's not going to deny what her mother said. The man asked Catherine, "Why and what is she here for?" The girl didn't answer anything, but thought that she hadn't even expected to meet a mage in such a wilderness. She realized that she could not let him know that she was afraid. So she said that she didn't know what he was imagining. But she's here to scrub that awful drawing off the floor, and unlike him, she's not in the mood. So come on. You're not going to shake your rights in someone else's house, and either you get out of here or you start cleaning up, Catherine told him. When I don't get introduced, hearing this, he was very surprised that she said in someone else's house. So the girl pulled a deed from her pocket and said that this paper confirmed that she was Catherine Fawny, the new owner of this mansion, and the earth, the addition, and all that is beneath and above them belong to her alone. So to trespass on my property like that and then threaten me is ridiculous, Catherine told him as he read the contract. After he finished, she took the piece of paper from him and told him that if he was tight on his ears, she could repeat everything slower. After a brief silence, the man said, "So you bought this house along with the land?" The girl confirmed his words. The man then said that if it turns out that she is the new owner of the place, then let her start by letting her apologize to him. But Catherine didn't listen to him very attentively because he looked familiar. She knew that such a man was worth seeing once, and she would never forget him. But she didn't remember where she knew him from. But the stranger asked that she tie up her blouse, from which she had quite recently retrieved the contract, and turned away from her. The girl said she thought he could get out of there faster than she could tie the braid, and she thought to herself that for a man who broke into a stranger's house uninvited, he was behaving like a gentleman. Then the guy decided to leave, but Catherine pulled him by the sleeve and told him to wait. After that, she explained that she didn't have candles and asked him if he could leave this flower that was next to her here. And things had been pretty quiet since that day. She was most concerned about the magic circle in the basement, but at some point it stopped burning and seemed to turn off. So she was able to focus on cleaning. The mansion was really huge, so it took her a few days just to clean it all up. But she was enjoying her long-awaited freedom. She could do what she really wanted to do, and in the mornings she sat quietly and drank tea. As she thought, living alone was just fine, and she was glad she had decided to leave that house. It was all good until this man moved in with her. The man asked if she heard any strange or scary noises at night. Catherine replied that she did not hear anything like that. Then he asked, could it be that the house is shaking for some inexplicable reason? She replied that it wasn't. He asked what about the nightmares. The girl replied that she had no such dreams. It's worth explaining what happened. Just as the water was boiling and she was about to enjoy a cup of tea, the man suddenly appeared. To her questions about when, where he came from, and why, he didn't answer and just sat down at her table defiantly. After that, he started asking all sorts of strange questions. After these questions, he apologized for pushing her around like that, and asked if she wanted to look for another house. Catherine replied that there was no way she wanted to change it. Then the stranger suggested that maybe it was hard for her to talk to other people. Well, the girl said she's talking to him, so she was fine in that respect. At that moment, Catherine thought that she was not really going to answer so one-syllable to his questions, but she didn't know what to do, because she really hadn't heard anything strange, and she wasn't having nightmares. "Put the cup of tea down," she said, as she recalled the real estate agent telling her about the strange noises too. At this point, the man asked, and she still, hearing even that, had decided to buy the mansion. Catherine replied that yes, and it was no problem at all for her. At that moment, the girl wondered why she was so obedient in answering all his questions. Maybe she was so mesmerized by his face. The man now looked extremely elegant, as if he were an aristocrat from some noble family, and he did not remind her of the tramp he had been when they first met. He also had a completely different eye color. Catherine supposed maybe it was the darkness of the basement that made her think she saw purple. Catherine didn't understand why she was so uncomfortable meeting his gaze, and she assumed that most likely she just imagined it in the dark. "Think it over," Catherine said. If she had answered all his questions, could he please leave her? Otherwise, I'll really have to report him for trespassing. But the man did not answer her. He continued to sit in his chair. Then Catherine jumped up and asked him what he was thinking about, and whether he was going to leave or not. Started to get up from the table and said then they were done for the day. Catherine said, "Since when does he decide?" She wouldn't do anything now. She said to let him know that next time she would indeed file a report on him. He seemed to ignore her words and started pulling something out of his pocket. Said something else. After that, he put the money on the table and said it was for her for tea. When Catherine heard this, she was very much surprised. But then suddenly the door slammed shut and she screamed, asking herself what it was all for. When he left, the girl thought, in big cities, do all men behave like this? What if they came out with a handsome face, so can they behave like shameless men? But she decided not to think about it anymore and to see how much city men paid for tea these days. So she picked up a bill that was lying on the table. When she unwrapped the bill, she was surprised, because it was 100 leads. With that amount of money, you could keep 6 servants for a month. She wondered even more, who was he that was throwing around so much money? 5 days had passed since she was left with 100 leads for tea. She realized that it was time to do grocery shopping, so she went to the bazaar. She'd already picked up a small selection of groceries, so she went and checked everything off the list. She seemed to have everything she needed for the soup. As she approached the alley, she saw that there were a lot of people near the bulletin board, and she wondered why that was so. She thought that maybe it was because the emperor had died, so she decided to go over to the board and read what it was about. It said that Archduke Kizar, after 2 years of wandering, had finally finished his journey and fulfilled the emperor's order. When Catherine read it, she didn't understand why there were so many people. It wasn't very interesting after all. But when she looked at the picture, she realized it was the same man who had come to her and given her 100 leads. When she looked more closely, she realized that they were a little different. The Archduke was handsome, of course, but the man who'd broken into her house was no match for him. His gaze was cold, and he looked darker, with his mouth closed. But then suddenly a man came up to the girl from behind and, laughing, said that she spoke as if she had seen his lordship in person. When the girl turned around, the man continued, "Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Mel Fabrice, head of security for the northern part of the city." She gave her name and said that she was glad to make his acquaintance. She then added that she was not well acquainted with capital politics, so she asked what order the Archduke had received. The man told her back that he had to deal with the horrible dragon everyone calls Corsolopus. Catherine had heard of him, and asked Mel if he was referring to that Corsolap that farmed the mountains in the south of the empire. The man said that his lordship is the greatest wizard and only he can rival the emperor. So whatever the glory of this dragon, the Archduke, he is no match for. It is because of him that the people of Christopher can sleep easy. The terrible dragon Corsolop has burned down a small kingdom on the southern borders of the empire and made it his domain. So Cesare is such a powerful wizard that he was able to kill a monster like that alone? The girl thought in surprise. And he's a magician, so he's definitely the man she saw. So she was trying to get the Archduke himself to mop the floor. Yes, if she knew, she would bitch and not say anything to him. Well, then suddenly their awkward silence was interrupted by a man who said that he had heard that she was the new owner of the mansion on the hill. He also said that if she needed help, she could come to him any time. When the girl returned home, the sun was already setting. She went out into the yard to feed the little red kitten. When she put his feeder on the ground, she thought that she had to tidy up the garden afterwards. She hadn't even finished cleaning it yet. She wondered if she would be kicked out of town for this. I thought that, judging by how quiet it had been the last few days, things might have settled down, especially since the Grand Duke must have more important things to do. When the cat had finished his food, she petted him and said, "Good for you, Meow. You don't have to worry about money or housing. You don't have to. You live in peace." But then suddenly her voice was interrupted by a loud explosion coming from her house. Everyone was very frightened. Catherine turned around to see what it was, but she noticed that her house now had a big hole in it. She thought maybe she was dreaming about all this now, but then all of a sudden she saw some huge monster and that man in the house. She recognized him. This monster said he would very carefully peel off his muscles layer by layer and eat them, enjoying watching him squirm in agony. He said that he might not even think of running away with his tail between his legs, but his opponent wasn't even going to retreat. So they got into a fight. When it was over, Catherine went into the house and approached the man. She asked what he was doing in her house and what kind of strange monster it was. The man was surprised to hear her say it was a monster. The girl pointed him at the dead monster and told him that goat head and what he was doing here. Said it was nothing special and said she should calm down a bit first. The girl asked if he's mocking her now because she's cleaning like hell, and he's tearing her half the house down and asking her to calm down. She said this. Then the part of the house that had recently been destroyed appeared behind him. The girl was surprised to see all this. She assumed he'd done it all with magic. But then, suddenly he spoke up and said that he'd said it was no big deal. And as she could see, the house she'd been cleaning like hell was in perfect order. Catherine thought that only one person in the county could possess such strong magic. So she asked him, "You are Archduke Cesare, right?" She wondered what he would say. She supposed he might say, "Yes, that's right. It's me, the master of this land, Archduke Cesare." He won't deny it, she thought. But when he spoke, the girl was surprised because he said it wasn't him, and he was confused with him often enough. At that moment, she thought he was lying, for he looked exactly like Archduke Cesare from the poster in the square. She could not believe that he would think she would believe him so easily. But one thing was clear to her for sure. It was that no good could come from dealing with this man. So she went to the bookcase and took out a book containing the money he had given her. She gave it to him and told him to take his money and not to come back. The man was very surprised and asked if she still wished to stay in that house after what she had recently seen. He would advise her to use the money to find a new home. Catherine apologized and said that she had no intention of leaving that mansion. Besides, she'd warned him days ago if it happened again, but she didn't have time to finish. He immediately grabbed her hand, which still contained the money, and asked her if she was afraid. If she died, she wouldn't be able to write a statement. She wouldn't even be able to open her mouth. Strong wizards from birth are distinguished by a special eye color. And the most dangerous of them, of course, is violet. Other colors can be not so afraid. We owners of violet eyes should be on guard, as Catherine always told her mother. Then it didn't seem like it the first time she met him, and she finally did realize who he was. He suddenly broke through her thoughts, saying that he wasn't forcing her to do it, but that she had seen it all for herself. Terrifying, inhuman-looking monsters get their hands on this mansion, or rather the land on which it was built. It is with words that he is only trying to say that at any moment today's incident could happen again. So he put more money in her hands and said it was for her own good. Next time she might lose not just her home, but her own life. So he told her to think it over. After saying that, he suddenly disappeared, leaving behind only 1,000 lins. Apparently he wanted her to stop annoying him and just leave while she had the chance. Now that she recognized the man's true identity, she became afraid that if she continued to resist further, she could face some rather unfortunate consequences. Now she realized that it was finally time for her to leave. She could find a better home very quickly anyway. As Catherine was going through the books she wanted to take with her, she saw some picture on the shelf. When she looked at it, she knew it was her mother. She was everything to Catherine. The time they spent together with her mother was the most beautiful period of her life. It seemed to her then that the whole world lay at her feet, and she was not afraid of anything at all. 10 years before, her mother had gone missing. In the intervening years, the girl has always wondered why she left her behind, an infinite number of times. Even though she didn't hold a grudge against her mom, she still missed her madly. After all, her mom was the dearest person to her. The portrait was in such good condition, as if it had been done quite recently. Momentarily, she thought that she knew her mom was still alive, but she didn't understand where in the mansion the portrait had come from. Even when she settled in Christopher after all the misadventures, she still felt a longing for her mother. Could what she found in her portrait in this house be just a coincidence? Perhaps somewhere she can find other clues that will eventually lead her to her mother. That man had it right. If it happens again, she may indeed be in danger, and then it is not a fact that she can save herself. Still, now that she had found her mother's picture, she would not back down so easily, and would never leave this house until she knew what had happened to her mother. Over the next 4 days, a lot of things managed to happen. Together with Roz, they searched the entire house for clues that might find Catherine's mom. Catherine decided to hire a maid named Roz. Thanks to her, they found so many things in the mansion. As befitted an old house, the interior was full of hidden spaces and obscure objects. It was obvious that the previous owner of the mansion had been into some very unusual things. That's what Catherine would have thought if she hadn't seen a giant monster in the house earlier. One evening, as Catherine sat by the fireplace reading a book, there was a knock at her door. It was her maid, who asked if her mistress was asleep. The girl was very surprised because she didn't realize what Roz was doing at such a late hour. Catherine went to the door and opened it, asking the maid what was wrong. Roz looked very frightened. The maid apologized to her mistress for disturbing her, and asked if she could stay with her for a short time. Catherine, of course, allowed her to enter, and herself thought that the girl was shivering so much that she was overcome with pity, and she suggested that the maid might have had a nightmare. Catherine asked her if she could get her something to drink to calm down, but Roz grabbed her arm and told her not to go there, because it was dangerous and there was someone in the mansion. Catherine didn't believe her, and said it couldn't be. The maid said she had heard strange noises from the hall during the night. Roz explained that first there seemed to be a woman's laughter, then the sounds of children's feet and a string quartet playing. They torment her every night and she has lost all sleep. At that moment, Catherine remembered the man's words about nightmares and strange sounds. She thought he'd made it all up. As the girl sat the maid down on the couch, she said she needed to check something and asked Roz to stay here and try not to worry. When Roz wanted to object, Catherine said that it was her house and no one would go in there without her permission. After that, she left the room and closed the door. Roz tried to stop her, but it was no use. At that moment, Catherine thought she must hurry, for the maid had said that she heard strange noises only at night. If she didn't get there before sunrise, she wouldn't know anything. She still has to live in this house, so she can't turn a blind eye to everything that's going on. Until she finds out what this house has to do with her mother, she will hold on to it until the end. With these thoughts, Catherine walked down the dark corridors and thought it was very quiet, and she could hear nothing but the sound of the rain. She decided to start by checking the basement. Suddenly, as she passed the window, she saw the same man in it. He was just standing there in the rain. Catherine didn't understand what he was doing there in such a heavy rain. So she ran to him and asked him what he was doing in her house again. When she touched him, he immediately fell to the ground. When Catherine wanted to ask what had happened to him, she felt his face and noticed that he was very cold, like ice. The girl realized that if he didn't get help now, it could end badly. So she decided to act. After a while, she still managed to bring the stranger into the room and put him next to the fireplace. The room was damp at first, but thankfully it warmed up. Catherine barely remembered how she'd gotten him into the house. It was as if she had gained superpowers. The man was very large and heavy. Catherine walked over to the stranger and covered him with a blanket to keep him warm. She hoped he should feel better now. The girl realized he wasn't human, but she couldn't understand why he was standing in the middle of such a heavy rain like he was going to die. But then suddenly Catherine began to hear voices. They were telling her to leave him and not to fulfill his wish. Voices everywhere parasitized anything dark and gloomy. Apparently the mansion was no exception. They were darker than shadows and nastier than dirt. They reeked of rotten water. These voices, appearing from her childhood, tried to ruin the whole mood. The voices kept urging her to leave him and promised to fulfill her every wish. Catherine got to her feet and said that it was getting too noisy. She asked them to shut their mouths and leave her alone. She began to threaten them, saying that if they twitched, she would make sure their spirit never stayed in that house again. She was surprised, as they didn't understand why they couldn't convince her to leave it. After that, the voices disappeared into the darkness, and Catherine was able to exhale quietly. She hadn't realized they existed until then. At a thought, it became clear to her that she and this man were of the same berry, even though they occupy a lower position. Catherine lay on the couch next to the stranger, and thought that these voices were saying the same thing. She realized that persuasion couldn't steal them away. They cling like leeches. They kept bugging her mom, too. Now she had done all she could and hoped the rain would stop tomorrow. She would have to start planting the garden with Roz. Still, Catherine didn't understand why this stranger was standing in the rain. She fell asleep with these thoughts. In the middle of the night, when the stranger woke up, he noticed Catherine lying next to him on the couch and decided to move her to bed. He laid her down in the bed, carefully fixing her hair so it wouldn't catch. Sitting down beside her, he whispered her name softly. Catherine. That day, Catherine's mother witnessed her husband cheating on her. She kicked him out into the street. He stood pathetically and begged her to let him back in. As she watched the maid with whom her husband had cheated on her being dragged away, she said to her daughter, "Catherine, this should be a lesson to you. If someone is rude to you, you must put a stop to such behavior without fear or delay. Only then will people understand their place and not dare to look down on you." She said it in a detached way, as if what was happening had nothing to do with her. But her voice was stern, as if she were talking about the worst thing in her life. Her mother told her that day she would make the woman who coveted another man's husband pay without fear. Catherine wondered at that moment if her mother wanted her to be like her in the future. At these thoughts, she woke up startled, looking up at the ceiling while lying in her bed. She went out for a walk around the house to get those thoughts out of her head. As she walked, she didn't understand why exactly she had dreamed this, since she had almost forgotten. And if she had dreamed about her mom, there might be nicer memories. The girl was surprised, for she didn't much remember where she had fallen asleep. But she didn't remember how she got to her bedroom. Suddenly, walking down the corridors, she noticed someone. She saw that strange man. He was standing by the window. She assumed he had come to his senses, but she didn't understand why he was still here. So Catherine went close to him and began to speak indignantly at him. But he immediately interrupted her and told her to come up. After that, he told her to shut up and look out the window. Catherine walked over, but she didn't understand what was wrong. When she looked out the window, she saw some strangers in dark cloaks. She didn't know who they were. After that, she took a closer look at them and saw the armor. She realized that they were knights from the Imperial Guard. After a brief silence, the man said that apparently the Imperial people had learned of what had recently happened in this house, and he'd told her that if she stayed there, she'd be in a lot of danger. Even if it was people this time, knights are quite capable of killing a man. All it takes is one little excuse, and the others will only have to bow their heads and close their eyes. Catherine asked if he was implying that they had come for her soul. The man replied that it could be said that way. The girl looked out the window again and said, "There you go. Thanks for the warning, but I still don't want to leave this house. So you all better just give up." The strangers were surprised at her phrase, "all of us." The girl explained that for her, he was almost no different from those knights, because he was just as likely to break into her house and disturb her life. They then moved away from the window and started to leave. The man said that this was already offensive and asked her to remind him who had carried her to the bedroom when she fell asleep. Catherine was outraged by this and asked if she could remind him who had saved him from a cold death last night. When the man tried to justify himself, the girl immediately interrupted him and said that because of him, she had gone out into the heavy rain and caught a cold. But she did not hear a word of gratitude in response. When he heard those words, he said she looked perfectly healthy, but decided to talk about something else. When they stopped, he said he'd better let her tell him where she was going, because she probably wouldn't pack up and leave in this weather. Catherine said she was at her home and didn't see where she was going to go from there, since these were the knights who had invaded someone else's domain. When they were getting acquainted, he heard it and asked if she was going to attack them. But the girl was no longer listening to him. She went to the place where tools are kept and took the shovel from there as a means of self-defense. But suddenly a man ran up and grabbed her from behind. He stopped Catherine and whispered in her ear that she was a silly girl. And at that moment the door creaked open. They turned around and saw those unfamiliar knights come into the house. One of them said, "It's nothing personal, but we have orders to kill you." At that moment his partner thought, "I wonder if this is the man." When Catherine saw them, she didn't expect them to be here already. She realized that she had to do something as soon as possible. But at that very moment, she saw the man who was standing next to her run up to those knights and start beating them. A few seconds later, they were already lying on the floor, dripping blood. The man approached them and said, "How dare you despicable people so brazenly break into someone else's home? Honor means nothing to the Imperial Guard anymore, I suppose? Or am I wrong, Sir Damien Rodina and Sir Cassin Clone?" the man asked. At that moment, Catherine thought that actually he had entered her place without permission too. So she said they had also broken into a house where a single woman lived, and asked that they not even think about making the excuse that they didn't know about it. One of them started apologizing for the inconvenience they had provided. The other began to shout that they were only looking around on orders, and they had no idea what was going to happen there. But the man interrupted him and said, "Cesare, Thoth continued and said that they did not know what was going to happen there, Mr. Cesare. At that moment, Catherine whispered to him that not only did he have a similar appearance, but his name was exactly like the Archduke's. Cesare replied that he often heard that. Suddenly their whispering was interrupted by the voice of one of the knights. He asked what Mr. Cesare was doing there. His partner elbowed him and asked what he was saying. At that moment a man came up to Catherine, put his arm around her shoulders, and said that he had dropped in on his beloved. They, the invited guests, had spoiled their fun by breaking into the house so late at night. He turned to the girl and asked if he was telling the truth. At that moment, Catherine thought his strategy made sense, but she didn't understand how he wasn't ashamed to say all this. Still, she could see he was trying to help her, so she decided to play along. She said that was right, and asked how he could not be upset when he'd had such a hot night ruined. When the knights heard this, one of them apologized and said that they had nothing to answer in their own defense. The other confirmed it. When Cesare heard this, he said to them, "Nothing, and I see you're still out of sorts. Come and see me when you return to the castle, will you?" At that moment, he leaned over to Catherine and said that he thought he had paid her enough for saving her from a cold death. But Catherine still wondered why he had intervened, for it surely wasn't just for her. After all, they weren't that close yet. Cesare shouted at the knights and said that maybe they would stop standing and finally leave if they were done. When things calmed down, they went back to the room with the fireplace, and he asked the girl what she was going to do with one shovel. Maybe she wanted the guardsmen to die laughing. Catherine told him that if he still cared about his life, he shouldn't do it again in the future. He put his arm around her waist and noticed that she was cold, so he invited her to sit by the fireplace. Catherine thanked him for his help. He looked at her carefully and said he was always at her service. When she sat down on the couch, she said that she would now give him the money he had left last time. Cesare said he didn't need it, because he didn't take money back. He then leaned closer to her and said that he had better let her give him the book, for it was very interesting. He would borrow it from the girl for a few days. He also told her not to tell him not to do it. He's going to take it anyway. Catherine was surprised to hear this, but told him to take it. He got excited and said that was the end of it. After that, he walked out the door. At this point, she thought he was quite good at surprising. The next morning, as Catherine was eating breakfast, Roz came up to her and asked if she had heard that Sir Percival was coming through town. Catherine was very surprised when she heard that name. Then the maid said, "Don't tell me you haven't heard of Sir Percival, the Paladin of Lilies." The girl said she might not have heard. Then Roz said that on the way back after conquering the demons he would stop by Christopher. But Catherine didn't listen any further. She reflected on the fact that as soon as she hears about the Lily Paladin, it always gets nasty. Percival Benedict Fachenlian, a descendant of royalty with a superior pedigree and ability, a true perfection nicknamed the Hero of the Holy City. He was indeed a famous person in the world. At that moment, Catherine remembered a situation from the past, when he had come to her and told her that she had a very luxurious bedroom for a maid, and that such a bedroom was proper for the daughter of a marquis. Anything could be, she thought. That country name, Anne Orleans, she made up too. In fact, Percival is some sort of a madman today, not a paladin of lilies. When Catherine lived in the lands of Viscount Orleans, Percival was her only salvation as well as her longtime love. She was like a caged bird then, and it was at that moment that Percival seemed to her an eagle that flew freely in the sky. That's why she liked him so much, even though their story didn't have a happy ending, and pleasant memories too. She still left her mark. After a while, Catherine thought that she hadn't thought of him at all in the time since they'd broken up, though she figured he'd probably forgotten about her too. So it didn't matter anymore. When the girl heard a sound outside the window, she walked over and saw Sir Damien sitting there. "No, is it at all normal to have such a large mansion and no gardener?" he said to himself. Catherine thought that you couldn't tell he was such a grouch. Sir Damien, who had broken in last night, had said he would atone for his wine by working for her for 10 days. Catherine thought it was quite advantageous for her because she could save money on a gardener. But she wondered if it was normal for the Archduke to command the Imperial Guard as he pleased. After petting her cat, she asked how she was keeping up. Every time she sees her, grows 10 times bigger. After all, not long ago it was so small, and now he's all grown up. At that moment, Catherine remembered that her mother had said something like that too. How she missed her. Then suddenly she started to get nervous and wondered where she had put her mother's portrait. She remembered that she had decided to put it in a book so she wouldn't lose it, and she chose just the red and brightest one, just what Cesare had decided to take. She'd completely forgotten that she had put a valuable thing there and easily gave away that book. The girl realized that if he lost it, it would be terrible, because such a portrait could not be found anywhere else. Such anxiety began to descend the stairs, and she thought, just so long as he was okay. When she opened the door to the basement, there was still that symbol there, and someone's voice spoke. "He who possesses me will rule the world." Catherine thought to herself she didn't want to do this, but she had no choice right now. So she picked up the mop and began to clean the symbol. When she'd first met Cesare, she'd been trying to erase that magic pattern. She wondered if she could summon it again. As she scrubbed the floor, she wondered why she hadn't even checked which book she'd given him. Her musings were interrupted by the voice of Cesare, who said, "For some reason I figured it would be you. No one else would do such a thing with a magic circle." When Catherine heard his voice, she immediately ran up to him and apologized for summoning him so suddenly. But she had a request for him. He was very surprised when he heard that she had a request. The girl said it was about that book he had borrowed. She asked if he could return it right away. He said he would give it back now. Afterward, he asked that Catherine go to him, held out his hand, and they flew together. Before she could think of anything else, Catherine took Cesare's outstretched hand, and in an instant, instead of a horrible basement, she found herself in a magnificent mansion. When she looked out the window, she thought it was very peaceful and cozy, and if she was right, it was Duke Christopher's domain. Catherine thought that if she asked him directly, he would probably be sneaky and say that he heard about it often, but that suddenly her musings were interrupted by Cesare's voice. "Lady Fani, Soul and Memory, did you need this book?" Catherine walked over to him and said that was right, that's what it was called. The man said it was the only book with a drawing between the pages, and if it was so dear to the girl, why didn't she remember its name? The girl took the book from him and told him that he had memorized it himself and asked if he had even read it. At that moment she flipped through the book and saw a portrait of her mother. That calmed her down. She then showed him the portrait and asked him casually if he knew this person. He replied that he was seeing her for the first time. He also asked who it was. Catherine said it was the man she was looking for, just a portrait. It turned up in the bedroom of her mansion, so she thought he might know her. At that moment, the girl thought that perhaps even Cesare couldn't know everything in the world. She suggested that perhaps her mother had only stayed in that house for a short time. Suddenly there was a knock on the room. The man told Gren to come in. When he came in, he apologized for being so sudden, but he had something to say. Cesare said it was no big deal and let him speak in front of a woman. Then Gren said it was about the feast to celebrate the Paladins' return to the Holy City. The man took the papers the assistant held out to him and said that these saints could only talk forever. They were nothing but trouble. At that moment, Catherine thought that when they had first met, he had asked if she was a chain dog, or a dog of the Holy See. She suddenly wondered what his relationship with the Holy City was. Then Cesare said we'd have to have a goat festival. She had it spread everywhere that if you smeared yourself in goat droppings, it would bring good luck. He also told them to get a little poop on them. That would be enough to keep them quiet and go away. Cesare spoke quite seriously. At this point, Catherine thought she should try not to pay attention. After all, she had chocolate cake on her plate. She said he was joking, but the man replied that he was dead serious. Then Catherine said that she would go home already because it was getting late. Besides, she was worried that Sir Damien wouldn't do anything to her garden. Cesare told her that he would like to suggest that she stay a little longer. Well, when it comes to Sir Damien, yes, there's nothing more to be done. And all he hoped was that being a member of the Imperial Guard would be of use to her. When she wanted to object to him, Cesare immediately held out his hand to go home. At that moment, Catherine thought it was so strange. Every time he did that, her heart started beating faster. It's just a small act of kindness, but until a couple days ago his smile had caused her confusion, and now he just seems shameless. As they walked, Cesare said that in the future she should memorize the names of the books that were so dear to her. At least if she didn't want to get into an embarrassing situation like today. Catherine asked him how she could contact him if she needed anything. At that moment, she wondered why she had said that. After all, it sounded as if she wanted to keep her lover. Cesare asked the girl if she needed him. Catherine said that if Sir Damien tried to escape during the night, he would need to report it. At that moment, Catherine thought that there was little else that could happen at the mansion, and she couldn't try to wash away the magic circle every time she needed Cesare. He said he could find out about Sir Damien anyway if she asked him to. He put the key in her hand with those words. He explained that if she needed it, she could use the key. She would figure out how to use it on her own. Cesare said that he would look forward to seeing them, and he was curious to know why she might need him. Catherine said she shouldn't expect it so much. Before they left, the maids came up to them and told her to come again. And next time they would make her favorite Madeline's cookies and herbal tea. When she got home, she started looking at the key and realized that she never asked how to use it. But she thought it would be better to start by putting it somewhere so she wouldn't lose it. At that moment, Roz burst into the room and shouted, "Mistress, you're back already!" When Catherine asked what was wrong, the maid said that they had to hurry because the Paladins of the Holy City were outside. They say that this house is a hotbed of evil, and that Catherine and Roz are demons. When the girl heard all this, she thought they might have come for the same purpose as the guardsmen last night. But this time, Cesare wasn't there, and she didn't know what to do. But then she realized that she couldn't rely on him for everything. She had to deal with the situation herself. At that moment she thought that Percival might be with them. Suddenly Catherine looked up and saw the paper bag, thinking that if she was careful, everything would end well. At that moment, outside, the Paladins were talking to Damien. One of them asked where his pride was, how he himself was not ashamed to work with a gardener in such a place. He asked how dare he still call himself an Imperial Guard. Damien asked a little quieter so he could hear him, and So asked him to stop yelling, until his fist killed the pride on his face. But then suddenly, his threats were interrupted by Catherine's voice, telling him to stop swearing and come over to her. When Damien looked at her, he was very surprised and asked what happened to her, because she had a paper bag over her head. The girl said it wasn't a big deal, just a pimple popped out on her cheek, and asked them to ignore it, but rather tell them what was wrong there. Damien said that Mr. Mal arrived with the Paladins and they started talking some crap and about her worshipping demons or something. Catherine knew they would say something like that, and they're here because of the magic circle in her basement. Catherine stepped closer and said hello to Mr. Mel. He apologized for the sudden visit. An order had come from the temple that the land must be cleansed of evil forces. He said that he understood that they had just returned from an expedition against demons, so they hadn't had time to warn her of their visit beforehand. The girl said she understood and asked them to go forward. She thought they had gone with Percival. At that moment, the gate opened. When one of the Paladins came through, he said that she would regret letting them in here. The girl said affably that she had only moved in a month ago, so the house was a bit messy, so she apologized in advance. When he walked a little further, he said that an unholy energy hit his nose. Then he looked at the grass and said that this cat was controlled by evil. When Catherine heard this, she asked Mr. Mal if he had definitely brought real Paladins. Ignoring her question, he told Carlos that it was the most common street cat. Yes, Carlos heard it. Then he started yelling for her to shut up and asked how dare she interrupt when the Paladin was speaking. But the girl didn't listen to him. She wondered why the cat had gotten smaller, but notwithstanding, Devon said he had been holding himself back for a long time, but this was too much. He went up to Carlos and said that Paladins always ruin everything. When Devon tried to hit him, he accidentally flicked his wig off with his hand, and now Carlos was standing there bald. Everyone around him was surprised. As everyone started laughing, Catherine turned her attention to the meow. At that moment, the cat said, "Everyone saw his wig come off. Now that's funny." She couldn't believe her eyes. The cat was actually talking. Carlos said he knew it all along, and he wasn't going to let it go. He started to draw his sword to get revenge. But at that moment, Percival joined them and said that it was all very boring, and that Carlos had finally decided to spoil all the fun. Catherine knew that Percival would be with them, so she was glad that she had decided to wear a bread bag on her head. Percival came closer and said that if it were him, he would run away in shame. When Carlos heard that, he was surprised and asked what he was saying. He didn't understand how one could run away when evil was right in front of them. Carlos asked how Percival could express himself like that. but the man got angry and asked why he had to obey him. After that, he walked closer to him and said, "You think I came here because I trusted an idiot like you? Make no mistake about it. I was just bored spending the morning in this dull little town." Percival said that may not be the case for a loyal paladin like him, but working as a dog of the Holy See and punitive expeditions are enough. When Catherine saw the whole picture, she knew that Percival had not changed at all. His demeanor and speech were completely out of character for a paladin. It was exactly as she remembered him. After a short silence, Percival said that if he had heard him, that was the end of the comedy, and ordered him to return to the hotel because he was already hungry. But he suddenly stopped and said there was a strange thing. He looked at the girl and said that she reminded him very much of someone. With that cocky look, voice, and physique, he said she looked so much like her it was sickening. Catherine became nervous. At that moment, Percival stepped closer to her, slapping his hand against a tree. He asked if she happened to know who he was talking about. When the girl didn't answer, he asked her name. At that moment, Catherine thought, "Why did I make contact with him again?" She didn't know what to make up in her defense, and that's when the girl said, "Goat droppings." Percival was not surprised by this, and he told her to be careful. "Carlos has nothing to be proud of but his background and his mansion," he said as he left. When all the carriages had parted, Catherine thought that Percival had obviously meant her by goat droppings. She took off her mask. Catherine thought he had already forgotten her existence. She couldn't believe he still remembered her. The next day, Roz asked if Catherine wanted to see the procession of Paladins. They were walking down the street. Roz replied that, of course, because they are very beautiful, even though they don't behave very well. But they look majestic. Catherine said she would go ahead. Roz wished her a good time and said they would meet back at home. Sir Carlos said the meow was a demon, but in the end they decided to take it in. Devon, after everything that happened, asked if demons could be kept as pets, but Catherine decided to keep him anyway because he was very cute. Before he left, Mr. Mal said that this demon cat almost got him in trouble. In other words, Mr. Mal didn't care if the cat was a demon or not. To become a wizard in this world, one must necessarily make a contract with a demon. That's why in Christopher, the land of the great wizard, people exalt mages and are quite friendly to demons. When the people in the crowd saw Percival, they began to say, "O pride of the holy city, Sir Percival, paladin of the lilies, look here, I am here. Ah, have I lived to see him with my own eyes?" At that moment, Catherine remembered a moment from the past. "Let's drop everything and run away, and meet tomorrow at noon under the elm tree. I'll be waiting for you." Those were Percival's words from long ago. Of course, Catherine wanted no part of his foolish scheme, but she had no choice. Then suddenly a man riding a horse passed by Catherine and noticed her. He turned sharply, and the girl tried to run away. As she ran, she thought it must be a joke. She didn't understand how he could have spotted her in such a crowd. Catherine thought that she had come to this procession for nothing. If she met this madman again, she would no longer be able to leave with her head held high. Therefore, she could not under any circumstances allow that to happen. When she had run far enough away and disappeared around the corner, she thought she had succeeded in escaping. She believed he wouldn't have choked through the crowd to catch up with her. Suddenly, someone grabbed her shoulder. She was startled and fell to the ground. When she looked up, she saw Devon and asked what he was doing here. The man explained that he had come to buy a pest control product, and the store owner said he had to watch the store and keep an eye on what was going on. Catherine thought, pest control? She looked around and realized that she ended up outside a flower store in the square as she ran. She ended up coming back to the same place. Devon speculated that perhaps the man was madly in love with Catherine, and that's why he was chasing her. Well, love and love. "Why secret at once?" questioned Catherine. "They say he's been engaged to someone since birth, rumored to be a fearsome beauty," said Devon. "Percival used to have a bride, according to rumor. It was a girl from birth who had poor health and was often sick," he added. "Her existence had almost no impact on his life, while there were many contradictions in Catherine Orleans," Devon continued. "She tried to hide her true face as much as possible and not to clash with anyone. And outside of it, she wore the mask of a cunning girl who was quite capable of bullying any paladin of the Holy See," he explained. "So even if Percival didn't have a fiancée, still couldn't stay together." At this point, Catherine asked Devon what he thought if a man offered a girl to run away together. What would that say about his attitude toward her? Devon replied that it meant he loved her, and asked, "And what did he offer you that?"